Critical reading, purpose, and perspective. Okay. This little story is something that I would like you to read. You may need to pause the screencast so you can read the story, and then we're going to go from there. So go ahead and read this. What did you think after reading that little story? I'm assuming that most likely you didn't think too much. It was just a little story. It was no big deal. Two boys skipped school and messed around in one of the boys' house. It wasn't a whole lot to say, but that's exactly the point. If you had no thoughts while reading this, it's because you didn't read with purpose or perspective. And it's very difficult to read critically without purpose or perspective. So first let's talk about author's purpose, okay? So authors always have a purpose whenever they're writing anything that they are writing. So they're always thinking about, what is it that I'm doing? Am I trying to give information? Am I trying to teach something, like the author of our textbook? Am I trying to sell something, such as an advertisement or an infomercial or a commercial? Or am I trying to persuade people to maybe change their thinking? Or am I pushing an agenda? So many of the arguments and articles, the editorials that you've read, and even advertisements have this purpose behind them. Sometimes the author is maybe trying to give some thought-provoking insights, such as, poetry, literature, or self-help books. But sometimes the author is just simply trying to entertain you, stories or magazines, similar to the little story we read before. The author's purpose there was probably just to tell a little story. However, we also have the reader's purpose. This is your purpose for reading. And critical thinkers become very aware of why they are reading particular pieces. Oftentimes, especially in college courses, you're reading this piece because you were told to. Your instructor handed you this article and told you to read it. I mean, that's a good enough reason, but for you to become a critical reader, if somebody just hands you a piece and says to read this, and they don't give you a lot of directions with it, sometimes you will have to determine the purpose for reading. You will have to set your mind in a place that will keep you more engaged with the article. And sometimes you will have to say, I'm going to read this in argument form, or I'm going to read this to see how much I can learn. Something like that, so that it keeps you engaged. Because critical readers always read with purpose, and knowing this purpose really helps to activate your brain because we are very task-oriented as humans. So before you read anything, again, ask yourself, why am I reading this? Alrighty, so we're going to practice this because I want you to get the feeling of the differences between reading with purpose and reading without purpose. So the first time you read the little house story, you just read it. I didn't give you any directions, and because we haven't done this activity, you maybe didn't put anything in your head as to why you were reading it. So this time you're going to. This time I want you to read it with the purpose of determining how many little bits of trouble the boys caused by skipping school and going to this house. I want you to think about all the rules they broke and what kind of damage they could have caused or what kind of danger they could have encountered. You had two boys that were alone in this house without anybody knowing. So read the story again, and this time read it with the purpose that I just gave you. And I want you to take some notes as you're reading. Okay, here's the story again. Go ahead and pause the screencast and read this story with the purpose I explained in the slide before. So I want you to think about how your reading changed the second time. How was it a little different when you read it without purpose as opposed to reading it with purpose? So I want you to pause the show again and take a few notes regarding the differences in your reading. How did your brain feel? What did you do differently? How much more information were you able to attain the second time? And you're going to use these notes for the final activity, so this little bit of work isn't in vain. So hopefully you got a sense of what reading with purpose feels like. So with that, we're going to now add in perspective. You may have also heard point of view. That's another term that is used in this case. But reading with perspective adds another layer to your reading. It's similar to reading with purpose in that it gives you even more engagement in your brain. It keeps you less likely from drifting off as you're reading, which can be quite a problem. So if you're a person who sometimes has trouble staying focused, give yourself purpose and add in some perspective. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So when you read with perspective, you are oftentimes reading from your own personal perspective. We just don't always know that we're doing these things because they come naturally. The problem when you read from your own personal perspective is that it can limit your comprehension, and you're only reading with your personal side, with your beliefs, your values. So, for example, if you read an article on abortion, you would naturally read it with your stance on the issue. You really wouldn't be thinking too much about the other side's perspective. And that's natural because you would be thinking in terms of how you feel about the subject, what you believe about it. But if you think of others' perspectives or even take a whole other perspective as you read, it's going to give you even more comprehension. It's going to enhance your understanding even further. And so we're going to practice again. And this time we're going to read this same little story with a different perspective. We're going to read it with a different point of view. And again, I want you to take notes on how it was different this time and what you did differently. So I'm giving you the purpose of reading it with a different perspective. So you're going to choose to read this story either as a robber or a realtor. So if you choose to read it as a robber, your directions are here. You want to think about how you would plan to rob this house and what information is given to help you with this deed. Or if you choose to read it as a realtor, think about all the information you were given if you were to be the one to sell this house. It's a pretty expensive house from what I could tell, and most realtors receive 3% of the sales price as a commission. So let's pretend it was a $600,000 house. You would be walking away with about $18,000. That's pretty motivating. So think about all the stuff you would need to know to get that big commission. So let's read it again with perspective. And again, go ahead and pause this as you're reading and take a few notes. Okay, hopefully this little activity, this little mini lesson gave you some insight on reading with purpose and perspective. You're going to use these two skills in the activity that follows. However, for a quick 15 points, just to show that you listened to this lecture and learned a little bit in this mini teach, I want you to answer these three questions. You can put them in a text box or upload a document, and it gives me some insight on how well you were able to attain the objective with this screencast. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully this will come in handy as we continue to read with purpose and perspective.